Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Be a Game Master. Trying something a little different here today. Instead of you seeing me sitting around a table chatting, I'm rather going to show you what I'm talking about as we go through it. And today's talk is part one, I think, of several parts on world building. And of course, you know me by now, my focus is always on story. So how does world building and story fit together? Quite simply, there are four statements which I use as my watchwords, and they are: how does your world evoke story? How does it help drive story? How does it change story? And finally, how does it control story? So those are the four columns around which I will then move on to designing the nitty-gritty of the world, the different leaders, the countries, the nations, and that kind of thing. Let's have a look at each one of those four pillars. Firstly, how does your world evoke story? So the term evoke is, to a lot of D&D players, you think of evocation, which is the fire magic. But in terms of evoking, remember, the whole goal of you as a master GM is to inspire your players to be better than what they currently are. And there is no better way to do that than to evoke in them the sense of the location, the sense of the world, and the best way to do that is to look at what it is that you're trying to evoke. This is a particularly tricky question because you say, well, what are you trying to evoke in your world? Before I start any session, and I've said this before, I sit down with my players and I say, right, what do you want to do next? What type of campaign do you want to play? What type of setting do you want to play in? But principally, I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're trying to look for in terms of their game. Are they looking for a mysterious game where there's rumors and secrets and intrigue? Are they looking primarily for a violence-based game? Are they looking for a survival-based game? Are they looking for a game that strictly pits them against ridiculous odds and they have to try and survive somehow? Whatever their answer, I then need to go back into my world-building space and say, now how do I evoke that? There's several little things that you can look at when answering the question of how do you evoke that. The first one is you always need to offer your players glory. I don't care what type of player you're playing with, whether it is the most timid, reserved female player, the most timid, reserved male player, the most gregarious, vicarious player. Everybody ultimately wants to feel as if they have achieved something, as if they have attained that glory. Ultimately, their player might achieve glory through a very simple act. It might be to simply survive on a desolate planet and build a little home with running water and a little pig farm. It's one of the campaigns I ran when I was running a one-on-one game. We had a Jedi who was stranded on a planet. And instead of leaving the planet or me working out some way of him being rescued, the player felt that he really just wanted to explore survival. And so that was what we were looking for. I was trying to evoke his sense of accomplishment, his sense of glory, by giving him major advances like discovering water or working out how to start building a wall from stone. But at the same time, I'm offering the glory, but I also have to then combat that by offering the negative. So offering the glory is not a simple little statement of saying allow the characters to be amazing. It is also, by its nature, requiring the characters to be in a position where they are not glorious, where if they do the wrong thing they are inglorious. So offering glory is one of the first ways of evoking this world, evoking the story in the world, because suddenly the characters are being glorious. And a lot of people will say, well, what if the characters aren't glorious? What if they just go about their daily lives? This is a difficult situation to find yourself in as a GM, because what then are you going to give them? Are you going to make it that the coffee machine suddenly goes on the fritz and that there's an adventure in terms of finding and solving that? Well, there's glory in that, isn't there? So if we have NPCs who are cheering on the coffee-seeking desk jockeys, suddenly it becomes glorious. The idea behind offering glory is that players need to see that there is something that they can actually contribute towards. So whatever your world is, if there are already things in motion that they really have no option of being involved in, why are you offering it to them in the first place? If you create a universe like Star Wars is very difficult. There are already superheroes running around who are going to achieve the ultimate glory. So what's left for the players? If you start off in a world that doesn't offer the players anything, why should they be invested in your world to begin with? This leads me on to the second idea of the way of evoking your story in your world, is to offer adventure. There needs to be hooks. Now, there again are two very different styles to GMing. As you know, I like the freeform or sandbox style, where I will throw out 5 or 6 hooks, 5 or 6 adventure starts that the players can pick up on or not. And it really doesn't matter if they do or if they don't. They as players, however, know that there are things for them to go and do. No one is sitting around drumming their fingers. As a matter of fact, for me, the most frustrating point as being a GM is when I have thrown out a dozen different adventure hooks of various and very different angles and approaches, and the players decide to spend an entire session in the market. Now, I let my players do that because the market allows me to offer them glory. It allows me to set up even more adventures if I need to, but also it means that the players just want a bit of a break. They want a moment of glory to go and spend their hard-earned cash, and there's nothing wrong with that either. We then need to offer some kind of resistance. The world cannot simply be a big pushover. Every adventure cannot simply be simple. Every moment of glory has to have been through overcoming resistance or overcoming odds against them. If you stack the odds too great against them, then it becomes impossible. Modern settings often suffer from this, where you have players and a DM who've watched 15 billion episodes of CSI or pick a show that deals with modern day settings, and the players simply by being players get themselves into a situation where there really is no justification for them not to be arrested and executed. How are you going to solve that? How is your world that you've created going to allow you an out on that? And you have to have it, and it can't simply be just a mechanism of, oh, a government official signs your release warrant because he can. You need something more concrete, and we're going to come to that a little bit later. So your world needs to offer resistance. It needs to offer the chance that characters will actually fail. You can also evoke your world through the story by setting the scale. I talk in grand scales. My players very seldom will end a campaign having taken over just a very small portion of the world or having changed just a very small aspect of it. Usually my characters have ended up defeating gods, changing landscapes, destroying planets, whatever the case might be. But they have always overachieved in certain circumstances. And I have had players who've come to me and said, have you ever run a small game where it's just a little adventure and a little tweak and a little change in a very, very big world? I have done that, usually with smaller groups, because smaller groups allow you to control things on a much finer level, and their focus might not be as grand. Having said that, there is a reason why we roleplay. It is to tell a fantastic story, at least that's my opinion. To tell a fantastic story, you need to have a fantastic environment and in a fantastic setting. This means your scale must match. So if you want every little village that they come across to have 13 inhabitants, and if you want the castle of the king to simply have 3 little rooms and 4 little dirty pages and 2 little guards, and the dragon that they're fighting is a small little green dragon who puts up a little bit of resistance but rolls over dead, that's absolutely fine. But then you need to bring in some kind of scale. You need to give them some kind of sense as to why they should care. So unless they're going to take over that castle, defeat the dragon and get their applause by 12 villagers who really should be starving, I don't really see the point. You might want to run a small intimate game, and certainly the Jedi on my planet that was building his little farm and trying to survive was a small scale game. They do happen. They just don't really inspire a lot of fun if there's 6 players and 1 GM. At least that's my opinion. And finally, you should evoke a sense of tone. Tone can be very, very difficult to achieve in a world setting, because what is the tone of planet Earth? People might argue that it is a slightly cynical, definitely self-absorbed, definitely self-invested place where people will help you if it doesn't cause them any issue or stress or loss of money. People will also help if you offer them money, but again, most people won't break major laws. Most people will happily break minor laws which won't hurt anybody. Now, that's a perfectly acceptable tone to set, but is it the complete tone? Is it the tone that you want for your game? I ran a game where I had a setting known as Quethlin, the City of Whispers. The entire story of Quethlin was that there were these 7 towers owned by 7 families, and each of the towers controlled a specific aspect of the city, whether it was sanitation or food or army or whatever the case might be. And the tone was that everybody was out to get something on somebody else. Mysteries, whispers in the dark, secrets was the main currency. The tone was set by each of the characters having to write down secrets on their character creation, as well as me writing down secrets that they knew about specific people within that world. So beyond the borders of the city, the rest of the universe didn't really matter at the point of creation because it was hyper-focused around the city of Quethlin. I made sure that all of the adventures, regardless of which ones they took, either took them away from Quethlin very briefly and then brought them back. And then what I did was to make sure that Quethlin felt very different to the rest of the world, was that the surrounding countryside was a bunch of farmers who really just didn't care about secrets, mysteries, or anything along those lines. That kind of brought the players back, which talks, oddly enough, to something that we're going to be discussing in our next little update from the cave, which is how to control your story through world building. I hope this has helped you in some way look at world building from a different perspective, from the perspective of evoking story in your game rather than just trying to create an entire planet with continents and kings and queens and things. And as we go through these next series, you will see how once you have created this world that creates story, filling in all of the details like kings and queens and dragons and lords and ladies and starships really just becomes a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, because it's all been done for you through the story. Please let us know if you liked this particular edition of From the Cave, How to Be Master of the Game, and if you did, hit that subscribe button. We really like subscribers. We do have a Facebook page. You can look at us there on From the Cave. And the other question that we pose to you is, what do you think of this new format? Do you care that you no longer see my fat ugly face and you just hear the rather annoying high-pitched voice, or would you prefer to see me? Leave your comments below. We're happy to answer questions as they come in. Till next time, happy gaming.